At 11 a.m. on February 21st, 2003, a hotel housekeeper pushed open the door to room 237, expecting to find the usual aftermath of another business traveler's stay. Instead, she discovered something that would haunt her for years to come. In the bathtub lay the body of a young woman, 23-year-old Amanda Torres, her dreams and aspirations extinguished by the hands of someone she trusted completely. Have you ever believed someone's promises so deeply that you overlooked the warning signs? Have you ever trusted a person in authority, only to realize they were capable of unspeakable betrayal? What happened in that hotel room wasn't just murder. It was the deadly conclusion of a web of lies that had been growing for months. The quiet suburban community of San Ramon, California, was about to be shaken by a case that exposed the devastating consequences of deception. This wasn't a random act of violence or a crime of passion between strangers. This was something far more calculated, far more personal, and far more chilling. But let me ask you this: what drives someone to cross the line from lies and betrayal to taking another person's life? How does a successful pharmaceutical executive, a man with everything to lose, decide that murder is his only option? Before we continue, I want you to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to this channel, and together we're going to examine every detail of this case that shocked California. The story begins with what appeared to be a simple workplace romance. A married executive and a young receptionist. We've heard variations of this tale countless times. But what makes this case different is how one man's secret would destroy multiple lives and ultimately lead to cold-blooded murder. Richard Caldwell seemed to have it all. Amanda Torres was just starting her career, full of hope for the future. Neither of them could have predicted that their paths would cross in a way that would end with one of them dead and the other spending life behind bars. The question we need to answer is this: when does an affair become a death sentence? How did a relationship that started with late nights at the office and secret lunch meetings transform into a crime scene that would expose the darkest corners of human nature? Stay with me as we examine every detail of this case, because what you're about to learn will show you just how dangerous it can be when someone values their secrets more than human life itself. Richard Caldwell had mastered the art of appearances. At 42, he embodied everything that suburban California represented in the early 2000s. His two-story home in San Ramon's most desirable neighborhood featured manicured lawns and a 3-car garage housing his luxury sedan. Every morning, he kissed his wife Jennifer goodbye, helped load their 2 children into her SUV for school drop-off, and drove to his corner office at a mid-sized pharmaceutical company where he held the title of senior sales director. To his neighbors, Richard was the friendly guy who waved from his driveway and never missed the annual block party. His colleagues knew him as the man who could close the biggest deals, the one who charmed doctors and hospital administrators into signing contracts that others couldn't even get meetings for. He belonged to the country club, played golf on weekends, and coached his son's little league team when his schedule allowed. But perfection, as we often discover, can be an exhausting performance to maintain. Jennifer Caldwell had built her life around supporting Richard's career and raising their children. After 15 years of marriage, she had settled into the comfortable rhythm of suburban motherhood. She volunteered at the school, organized charity events, and believed she knew her husband completely. The man who came home each evening, loosened his tie, and asked about her day seemed genuine, devoted, and trustworthy. 23-year-old Amanda Torres represented everything Richard's polished world was not. Fresh out of community college with an associate's degree in business administration, she approached her receptionist position with an enthusiasm that veterans found both charming and naive. Amanda lived in a modest apartment in Pleasanton with a roommate, drove a used Honda Civic, and counted every dollar as she built toward her dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. What drew people to Amanda was her authenticity. She didn't hide her excitement when she mastered a new computer system or learned about the pharmaceutical industry. Her warm smile greeted every visitor to the office, and she genuinely cared about doing her job well. To Amanda, this position wasn't just a paycheck. It was the foundation for everything she hoped to achieve. The pharmaceutical company where they both worked buzzed with the typical energy of a successful mid-sized business. Sales representatives came and went. Meetings filled conference rooms, and the constant hum of ringing phones and clicking keyboards created an atmosphere of productivity. In this environment, Richard held considerable power. As senior sales director, he influenced hiring decisions, controlled territories, and determined which junior employees received opportunities for advancement. For someone like Amanda, Richard represented possibility. He was successful, articulate, and held the kind of position she hoped to reach someday. When he complimented her work or asked for her assistance on projects, she felt valued in ways that her entry-level role rarely provided. The attention from someone of his stature within the company made her feel seen and appreciated. Richard, meanwhile, had grown comfortable with the power his position afforded him. Younger employees sought his approval, colleagues deferred to his expertise, and clients trusted his recommendations. He had spent years cultivating an image of success and reliability, both at work and at home. But beneath this carefully constructed exterior, cracks had begun to form. The demands of maintaining his lifestyle, the pressure of meeting quarterly sales targets, and the routine of his 15-year marriage had left Richard feeling trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt increasingly hollow within. He had begun to crave excitement, novelty, and the intoxicating feeling of being desired by someone who didn't see him as a husband, father, or provider, but simply as an attractive, powerful man. Amanda represented youth, admiration, and escape from the responsibilities that defined his daily existence. She looked at him with respect and genuine interest when he spoke about his work. She laughed at his jokes, sought his advice, and made him feel like the successful, charismatic man he had once believed himself to be. The stage was set for a collision between Richard's need for validation and Amanda's trust in authority figures. Neither understood the true nature of the other. Amanda saw a successful mentor who might help guide her career. Richard saw an opportunity to recapture feelings he thought he had lost forever. What happened next would destroy both of their lives, along with the lives of everyone who loved them. The transformation from professional relationship to something more intimate didn't happen overnight. It began with the kind of seemingly innocent interactions that occur in offices across the country every day. Richard started lingering by Amanda's desk when he arrived in the morning, asking about her weekend plans or commenting on changes to her hair or clothing. These conversations, which initially lasted only a few minutes, gradually extended into longer exchanges about her goals, her background, and her thoughts about the company. Amanda found herself looking forward to these moments. Unlike other senior executives who barely acknowledged her existence, Richard treated her as if her opinions mattered. He remembered details from their previous conversations and asked follow-up questions that showed he was genuinely listening. When she mentioned struggling with a particular software program, he offered to stay after hours and help her master it. When she expressed interest in learning more about the sales process, he promised to include her in client presentations when possible. The first time they worked late together, Amanda felt a thrill that went beyond professional development. Richard had asked her to help prepare materials for a major presentation, and they found themselves alone in the office well past 7 p.m. As they worked side by side, their conversation shifted from business to personal topics. Richard told her about his college years, his early career struggles, and his dreams of eventually starting his own company. Amanda shared her aspirations, her family background, and her determination to prove herself in the business world. When Richard offered to buy her dinner that night, Amanda saw it as a kind gesture from a mentor. When he chose an upscale restaurant far from their usual work area, she assumed he wanted to discuss her future with the company. It wasn't until he began complimenting her intelligence, her beauty, and her potential that Amanda realized the evening had crossed into different territory entirely. Richard was skilled at reading people, a talent that had served him well in sales. He recognized Amanda's hunger for recognition and advancement, her slight insecurity about her modest background, and her genuine admiration for his achievements. He began to feed these needs with carefully chosen words and gestures that made her feel special, valued, and desired. The compliments escalated gradually. Richard told Amanda she was too intelligent to remain in a receptionist role. He suggested she had natural business instincts that reminded him of himself at her age. He began to confide in her about work pressures and challenges, making her feel like a trusted advisor rather than a junior employee. Each conversation built upon the last, creating an intimacy that felt both professional and personal. 3 months after Amanda had started working at the company, Richard made his first overtly romantic gesture. He brought her flowers on a Friday afternoon, explaining that he had noticed she seemed stressed about an upcoming project. When she thanked him, he suggested they discuss her concerns over dinner that weekend. Amanda agreed, telling herself this was still about career development, even as her heart raced with excitement. That dinner changed everything. Richard chose a dimly lit restaurant in the next town, where they were unlikely to encounter anyone from work. He ordered wine, praised Amanda's intelligence and beauty, and gradually steered the conversation toward his personal life. He told her his marriage had become a business arrangement, that he and Jennifer stayed together only for their children's sake, and that he felt lonely despite being surrounded by people. Amanda found herself drawn into Richard's narrative of an unhappy man trapped in circumstances beyond his control. When he reached across the table and took her hand, she didn't pull away. When he suggested they continue their conversation at a nearby hotel, she agreed, convinced that she was falling in love with a man who would soon be free to love her back. Their first intimate encounter left Amanda feeling exhilarated and terrified. Richard was gentle, attentive, and reassuring, promising her that this was the beginning of something beautiful. He told her he had never felt this way about anyone, that meeting her had awakened feelings he thought were dead. He asked her to be patient while he figured out how to extract himself from his marriage without destroying his children's lives. For the next 6 months, their affair continued with increasing frequency and decreasing caution. They met for lunch at restaurants in neighboring towns, spent evenings at the same hotel, and exchanged gifts that Richard claimed his wife would never notice missing from their accounts. Richard became more comfortable taking risks, sometimes calling Amanda from his home phone when Jennifer was out with the children. Amanda, meanwhile, found herself living for their stolen moments together. She told her roommate she was dating someone wonderful, but that the relationship needed to remain private for professional reasons. She began to plan her future around the promises Richard made about their life together once he left his wife. Neither of them realized that their secret was about to become a matter of life and death. January 2003 started like any other month for Amanda Torres. She was happy, optimistic about her relationship with Richard, and excited about the promises he had made regarding their future together. But by the 3rd week of the month, something felt wrong. It began with a persistent exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. Amanda found herself struggling to stay alert during work hours, despite getting 8 hours of rest each night. At first, she attributed the fatigue to stress. Richard had been talking more seriously about leaving his wife, and Amanda felt the weight of anticipation about their future together. She convinced herself that her body was simply responding to the emotional intensity of waiting for her life to truly begin. But when the exhaustion was joined by recurring fevers that spiked without warning, Amanda began to worry. The lymph nodes in her neck became swollen and tender, creating a constant ache that made it difficult to concentrate on her work. Amanda had always been healthy, rarely catching even common colds, so these symptoms felt particularly alarming. Her roommate noticed the changes too, commenting on Amanda's pale complexion and suggesting she see a doctor. Amanda resisted seeking medical attention for nearly 3 weeks. She was young, she reasoned, and young people recovered quickly from whatever bugs they picked up. Besides, she had recently changed her health insurance through work and wasn't sure which doctors were covered under her new plan. The cost of an unnecessary doctor visit seemed like an expense she couldn't afford. But when the symptoms persisted and actually worsened, Amanda finally scheduled an appointment with a physician at a local clinic. She expected to receive antibiotics for what she assumed was a stubborn bacterial infection, perhaps some advice about getting more rest and improving her diet. The doctor, however, took one look at her symptoms and ordered comprehensive blood work. "I want to test for several possibilities," the doctor explained, not wanting to alarm Amanda unnecessarily. Persistent fatigue combined with swollen lymph nodes and recurring fever can indicate various conditions. "We'll check for mononucleosis, thyroid issues, and a few other possibilities." Amanda left the clinic feeling relieved that she had finally taken action. She expected to receive results within a few days, and anticipated that medication would resolve whatever was causing her symptoms. She even felt well enough to meet Richard for lunch that afternoon, though she noticed he seemed distracted and somewhat distant during their conversation. 3 days later, Amanda's phone rang while she was at work. The caller ID showed the clinic's number, and Amanda answered expecting routine results. Instead, the doctor's voice carried a gravity that immediately put her on alert. "Amanda, I need you to come in this afternoon so we can discuss your test results in person," the doctor said. "It's important that we talk face to face about what we've discovered." The tone of the doctor's voice sent Amanda's heart racing. Medical professionals didn't request emergency appointments to deliver good news. Amanda left work early, telling her supervisor she had a family emergency, and drove to the clinic with trembling hands. In the doctor's office, surrounded by medical diplomas and health pamphlets, Amanda received news that shattered her world completely. Her HIV test had come back positive. The doctor explained the implications carefully, discussing treatment options, lifestyle modifications, and the importance of informing recent sexual partners about potential exposure. Amanda sat in stunned silence as the doctor spoke about antiretroviral therapy, viral load monitoring, and the advances in HIV treatment that allowed people to live full, healthy lives. But all she could think about was how this had happened. She had been in only 2 relationships before Richard, both of which had ended years earlier. She had been tested after those relationships and received negative results both times. The inescapable conclusion hit her like a physical blow. Richard had infected her. Richard, who claimed to love her, who promised to build a future with her, who had told her she was the most important person in his life. Richard had given her a disease that would require lifelong medical management and had fundamentally changed every aspect of her future. Amanda drove home in a daze, her mind racing between disbelief, anger, and desperate hope that somehow the test results were wrong. She couldn't bring herself to go back to work that afternoon, instead spending hours pacing around her apartment, trying to process the magnitude of what she had learned. When she finally gathered the courage to call Richard that evening, her voice was barely controlled. She told him about the diagnosis and asked directly whether he had known about his HIV status before their relationship began. Richard's initial response was immediate denial. He claimed he had been faithful to his wife before Amanda and suggested, with shocking cruelty, that perhaps she had been with someone else during their relationship. Amanda's shock turned to fury. She reminded Richard that she had been tested before they met and that he was her only partner since then. She demanded he get tested immediately and threatened to contact his wife if he refused. The conversation became heated, with Richard alternately denying responsibility and making excuses for why he couldn't get tested right away. Over the next few hours, they spoke 6 times, with some conversations lasting over 30 minutes. Amanda's phone records would later show the frequency and duration of these calls, painting a clear picture of her desperation for answers and Richard's growing panic about his situation being exposed. By the final conversation that night, Richard's tone had completely changed. He admitted to engaging in risky behavior years earlier, but claimed he hadn't known he was infected. He begged Amanda not to tell anyone, particularly his wife, and promised he would help her through this crisis. Most importantly, he swore he would finally leave his marriage and commit to their relationship. But Amanda was beginning to realize that Richard's promises might be as worthless as his denials had been. The 2 weeks following Amanda's diagnosis marked a dramatic shift in Richard Caldwell's behavior. Colleagues at the pharmaceutical company noticed he had become increasingly unreliable, calling in sick multiple times and appearing distracted during important meetings. When he did show up to work, he seemed unable to focus on presentations or client calls that previously would have commanded his full attention. At home, Jennifer Caldwell observed even more troubling changes in her husband. Richard, who had always been methodical about his evening routine, began spending hours in the garage talking on his cell phone. When Jennifer asked about these lengthy conversations, Richard claimed they were work-related calls with clients in different time zones. But Jennifer noticed he often seemed agitated after these calls, and his explanations about West Coast meetings at 10 p.m. didn't quite add up. Richard had also started taking long drives alone, sometimes disappearing for hours on weekends without explanation. He told Jennifer he needed time to think about work pressures and upcoming quarterly reviews, but his behavior felt secretive rather than contemplative. Jennifer began to wonder if her husband was having some kind of midlife crisis, though she couldn't have imagined the true scope of his problems. Meanwhile, Amanda was struggling with both the physical and emotional toll of beginning antiretroviral therapy. The medication made her nauseated, and she found it difficult to maintain her usual cheerful demeanor at work. Her roommate had noticed the dramatic change in Amanda's mood and energy levels, and after days of gentle questioning, Amanda finally revealed everything. The conversation with her roommate was both a relief and a burden for Amanda. Finally having someone who knew the truth meant she no longer had to carry the secret alone, but it also made the situation feel more real and immediate. Her roommate was horrified by Richard's betrayal and urged Amanda to take action beyond simply demanding that Richard get tested. She insisted that Jennifer had a right to know she might have been exposed and could be at risk without realizing it. This suggestion created a new level of internal conflict for Amanda. Part of her still loved Richard and believed his promises about finally leaving his marriage to be with her. She clung to the hope that they could work through this crisis together and build the future he had described during their months of secret meetings. But another part of her was increasingly angry about the deception and frightened about what other lies he might have told. Amanda wrestled with this decision for days, alternating between loyalty to Richard and concern for an innocent woman who might be facing the same devastating diagnosis. She researched HIV transmission between married couples and learned that Jennifer Caldwell was almost certainly at risk. The knowledge that Richard might be unknowingly infecting his wife while continuing to make promises to Amanda created a moral dilemma she couldn't ignore. On February 12, 2003, Amanda made a decision that would seal both their fates. She spent the morning crafting an anonymous letter to Jennifer Caldwell, writing and rewriting the message until she felt it conveyed the essential information without revealing her identity. The letter informed Jennifer about her husband's affair and strongly urged her to get tested for HIV immediately, emphasizing that her health might be in serious danger. Amanda drove to San Ramon that afternoon and personally delivered the letter to the Caldwell family mailbox. She had obtained their home address through company records, though she had never seen the house where Richard lived with his family. Standing in front of the elegant two-story home with its perfectly maintained landscaping, Amanda felt the full weight of the destruction their relationship had caused. Jennifer Caldwell discovered the letter on February 14th, Valentine's Day. She had arrived home from grocery shopping, expecting to spend the evening preparing a romantic dinner for her husband. Instead, she found herself reading words that would destroy her understanding of her marriage and her life. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Jennifer waited until their children were asleep before presenting Richard with the letter and demanding an explanation. Richard's response followed a predictable pattern: initial denial, then minimization of the affair, and finally, when pressed about the HIV claim, eruption into defensive anger. Richard accused Jennifer of believing lies from some vindictive person who wanted to destroy their marriage. He claimed the letter was probably from a disgruntled employee or a competitor trying to damage his reputation. But Jennifer was not easily convinced. She had lived with Richard for 15 years and could recognize when he was lying. His defensive posture and refusal to make eye contact told her everything she needed to know about the letter's accuracy. Jennifer demanded they both get tested immediately. Richard agreed, probably hoping to buy time to figure out his next move, but investigators would later discover he never intended to follow through with any honest reckoning. His world was collapsing, and he had begun to consider desperate measures to protect what remained of his carefully constructed life. The clock was now ticking toward a final, fatal confrontation. On the evening of February 20, 2003, Richard Caldwell made a phone call that would change everything. Amanda was at home, trying to focus on a television program while her mind churned with worry about Richard's increasingly erratic behavior over the past week. When her phone rang and she saw his number, she answered immediately, hoping he had finally decided to be honest with his wife about everything. Richard's voice sounded different during that call, calmer than it had been in days, almost resigned. He told Amanda they needed to meet face-to-face to discuss their future and figure out how to move forward together. He suggested they meet at their usual hotel, the same place where they had spent so many evenings over the past 6 months. Amanda felt a surge of hope, interpreting his request as a sign that he was finally ready to commit fully to their relationship. Richard told her he wanted to make this right and be with her. Amanda agreed to meet him, feeling optimistic for the first time since receiving her diagnosis. She spent extra time getting ready, choosing clothing she knew Richard found attractive, and allowing herself to imagine that this meeting would mark the beginning of their real life together. She believed Richard was finally going to leave his wife and publicly commit to their relationship. What Amanda didn't know was that Richard had spent the afternoon making very different preparations. He had checked into the hotel 2 hours before their scheduled meeting time, using a false name but making the critical mistake of paying with his own credit card. Hotel security cameras captured him arriving with a small overnight bag, though he had told Amanda this would just be a brief conversation. Amanda arrived at 7:15 p.m., her car's headlights sweeping across the parking lot as she searched for a space near the entrance. The hotel's surveillance system recorded her walking confidently toward the building, unaware that she was entering the final hour of her life. She had no reason to suspect that the man she loved had been researching murder methods on his home computer for the past 3 days. Inside room 237, Richard had arranged the scene carefully. He had purchased a bottle of wine and scattered some of Amanda's favorite snacks on the small table, creating an atmosphere that suggested romantic reconciliation rather than deadly confrontation. When Amanda knocked on the door, Richard greeted her with a smile and a kiss, maintaining the pretense that this meeting was about their future together. For the first 30 minutes, their conversation followed the script Amanda had expected. Richard talked about his love for her, his regret about the HIV situation, and his determination to make things right between them. He poured wine and listened sympathetically as Amanda described the challenges of beginning medical treatment and the emotional toll of keeping their secret. But gradually, the conversation took a darker turn. Richard began asking specific questions about the anonymous letter Amanda had sent to his wife. He wanted to know exactly what she had written, whether she had kept copies, and who else knew about their relationship. Amanda, still believing they were planning a future together, answered honestly about her concerns for Jennifer's health and her decision to warn her about potential HIV exposure. Richard's demeanor shifted as he realized the full extent of the threat Amanda posed to his carefully constructed life. She wasn't just a romantic complication who could be managed with promises and gifts. She was a witness to his deliberate concealment of his HIV status, someone who could testify about his knowing deception of multiple partners. Her very existence threatened not only his marriage and career but potentially his freedom, as knowingly transmitting HIV was a criminal offense in California. What happened next would only be reconstructed through forensic evidence, as Richard would later provide multiple conflicting accounts of the evening's events. The medical examiner determined that Amanda had been strangled with what appeared to be a leather belt, likely Richard's own belt based on fiber evidence found under her fingernails. The struggle had been violent, with Amanda fighting desperately for her life, leaving defensive wounds on her hands and arms. Richard had apparently tried to make Amanda's death appear to be a suicide. After killing her, he moved her body to the bathtub and scattered prescription pill bottles around the bathroom counter, attempting to create the impression that she had overdosed. However, his staging was sloppy and unconvincing. The bruising pattern on Amanda's neck clearly indicated strangulation, and the defensive wounds showed she had fought her attacker. Hotel surveillance cameras captured Richard leaving the building at 9:37 p.m., carrying the same small bag he had brought with him. His movements appeared hurried and nervous, a stark contrast to his confident arrival hours earlier. He walked quickly to his car without looking back at the building where he had just committed murder. Amanda's car remained in the parking lot overnight, its presence a silent testament to the fact that she had never left that room alive. When housekeeping discovered her body the following morning, they found a young woman whose dreams of building a career and finding love had been extinguished by someone she had trusted completely. The investigation that followed would reveal the depth of Richard's deception and the calculated nature of his crime, exposing a man who had chosen murder over accountability for his lies. The investigation into Amanda Torres's death began within hours of the discovery of her body. Detective Maria Santos of the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office arrived at the hotel by noon on February 21st, immediately recognizing that this was no suicide despite the scattered pill bottles and staged scene. The evidence of strangulation was unmistakable, and the defensive wounds on Amanda's hands told the story of a young woman who had fought desperately for her life. Within the first day of investigation, Richard Caldwell emerged as the primary suspect. Hotel registration records revealed that room 237 had been rented under the name Robert Collins, but the credit card used for payment belonged to Richard Caldwell. This basic mistake would prove to be the first of many errors that would ultimately lead to his conviction. Phone records obtained by investigators showed a pattern of communication between Richard and Amanda that painted a clear picture of their relationship. The frequency of calls, particularly in the days leading up to the murder, demonstrated the intensity of their interactions. Most damaging were the 6 lengthy conversations on the day Amanda received her HIV diagnosis, calls that would later support the prosecution's theory about Richard's motive for murder. When detectives arrived at the Caldwell home on February 22nd, they found Richard in the process of packing a suitcase. He claimed he was preparing for a business trip scheduled for the following week, but a quick call to his employer revealed no such trip existed. This obvious lie immediately escalated Richard from person of interest to prime suspect. During initial questioning at the sheriff's station, Richard maintained his innocence with a series of increasingly implausible explanations. He first claimed he hadn't seen Amanda in several weeks, despite the overwhelming evidence placing them both at the hotel. When confronted with the hotel registration and credit card records, he changed his story, admitting to meeting Amanda but claiming they had simply talked about ending their relationship amicably. According to this second version of events, Richard insisted Amanda had been alive and well when he left the hotel around 8 p.m. He claimed she had seemed upset about their decision to end the affair but had accepted that their relationship couldn't continue. This timeline was immediately contradicted by hotel security footage, which clearly showed Richard leaving at 9:37 p.m. and Amanda's car remaining in the parking lot overnight. The search warrant executed at Richard's home revealed evidence that transformed the case from circumstantial to overwhelming. Forensic computer analysts recovered Richard's internet search history, which painted a disturbing picture of premeditation. In the 3 days before Amanda's murder, Richard had searched for untraceable poisons. How long does strangulation take? And most chillingly, can HIV be transmitted through murder? Even more damaging were the deleted files recovered from Richard's hard drive. Computer forensic experts found multiple drafts of suicide notes written in what appeared to be Amanda's voice. These documents suggested that Richard had originally planned to force Amanda to write her own suicide note before killing her. The notes contained references to depression over her HIV diagnosis and guilt about destroying a marriage, clearly indicating Richard's intention to make her death appear self-inflicted. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a detailed timeline Richard had created on his computer, outlining the steps needed to stage Amanda's suicide. The document included notes about pill types, body positioning, and methods for avoiding detection by hotel security cameras. This level of planning demonstrated that Amanda's murder was not a crime of passion, but a calculated execution designed to protect Richard's secrets. Jennifer Caldwell's testimony provided crucial context for understanding Richard's motive. She confirmed receiving the anonymous letter that had exposed the affair and described the violent confrontation that followed. More importantly, she revealed that Richard had been diagnosed with HIV 3 years earlier during a medical examination for life insurance but had never told her about his status. This information proved that Richard had knowingly exposed both his wife and Amanda to HIV while maintaining his facade of respectability. Medical records subpoenaed by investigators confirmed Jennifer's account. Richard had tested positive for HIV in 2000 during a routine insurance physical but had never sought treatment or informed any of his sexual partners about his status. The records showed he had been referred to an infectious disease specialist but had never followed up with the recommended care. The evidence against Richard continued to mount as investigators examined his financial records, phone communications, and work schedule. Bank statements showed unusual cash withdrawals in the weeks before the murder, suggesting Richard had been preparing for possible flight. His work calendar revealed he had deliberately cleared his schedule for February 20th, despite telling colleagues he had important client meetings that evening. Perhaps most telling was the physical evidence found in Richard's car and garage. Forensic technicians discovered traces of Amanda's blood on the leather belt found in his closet, fibers that matched the hotel's carpet on his shoes, and microscopic evidence that placed him at the crime scene during the time of the murder. The investigation had revealed not just a killer, but a man who had lived a double life of deception that ultimately cost an innocent young woman her life. Richard Caldwell was formally arrested on February 23, 2003, and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances. The arrest took place at his office, where he had attempted to maintain a normal work schedule despite the ongoing investigation. Colleagues watched in shock as detectives escorted their successful, well-respected colleague out of the building in handcuffs, unable to reconcile the man they knew with the monster described in news reports. The case immediately captured public attention throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. Local news stations covered every development in the investigation, and the story resonated with viewers who saw elements of their own lives reflected in the tragedy. Here was a successful suburban family man who had destroyed multiple lives to protect his secrets, a cautionary tale about the dangers of deception and the vulnerability of young women in workplace environments. The trial began in October 2003, drawing packed courtrooms and extensive media coverage. Prosecutor Janet Morrison presented the case methodically, building a foundation of evidence that left little room for reasonable doubt. She began with the timeline of events, using hotel surveillance footage, phone records, and credit card transactions to establish Richard's presence at the scene of the crime. Morrison's presentation of the computer evidence proved particularly devastating to Richard's defense. She walked the jury through each of Richard's internet searches, showing the progression from general queries about poisons to specific research about strangulation methods. The recovered suicide notes, displayed on large screens for the jury to read, demonstrated the calculated nature of Richard's planning and his intention to make Amanda's death appear self-inflicted. The prosecutor painted a picture of a man who had lived a carefully constructed lie for years, concealing his HIV status from everyone in his life while continuing to expose innocent partners to a life-threatening disease. Morrison argued that when Amanda's anonymous letter threatened to expose not only his affair but his criminal negligence regarding HIV transmission, Richard saw murder as his only option for maintaining his false life. The defense team, led by attorney Robert Chin, attempted several strategies to create reasonable doubt. They initially argued that Amanda's death was accidental, the result of a sexual encounter that had gone tragically wrong. This theory was quickly dismantled by medical testimony about the force required for strangulation and the duration of time needed to cause death by that method. Chun then shifted to portraying Amanda as emotionally unstable due to her HIV diagnosis, suggesting she might have provoked the confrontation that led to her death. This approach backfired spectacularly when Amanda's friends and family testified about her strength, determination, and plans for fighting her disease. Her roommate's testimony was particularly powerful, describing Amanda's anger at Richard's betrayal and her resolve to ensure that Jennifer Caldwell learned the truth about her potential exposure. The prosecution's medical expert testimony provided crucial context about HIV transmission and the legal obligations of infected individuals. Dr. Sarah Chun, an infectious disease specialist, explained to the jury how Richard's concealment of his status constituted reckless endangerment and potentially criminal transmission. Her testimony helped jurors understand that Richard faced not only the destruction of his marriage and career if exposed, but possible criminal charges for knowingly infecting others. Jennifer Caldwell's appearance as a witness marked one of the trial's most emotional moments. She described the Valentine's Day discovery of the anonymous letter, the explosive confrontation with her husband, and her gradual realization that their 15-year marriage had been built on fundamental deception. Her testimony about Richard's behavior in the days before the murder supported the prosecution's timeline and demonstrated his increasing desperation as his world collapsed. Medical testimony revealed that Jennifer had tested negative for HIV, a result her doctor described as remarkably fortunate given the duration of her exposure. The randomness of transmission meant that while Amanda had been infected, Jennifer had escaped the same fate through what could only be called luck. This revelation added another layer of tragedy to the case, highlighting how Richard's deception had endangered multiple innocent people. Amanda's mother, Rosa Torres, delivered a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in tears. She spoke about her daughter's dreams, her determination to build a successful career, and her trust in people that had ultimately led to her destruction. Rosa described Amanda as a young woman who had believed in working hard and treating others with respect, qualities that had made her vulnerable to Richard's manipulation. After 8 hours of deliberation on December 18, 2003, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. The special circumstances finding related to the murder being committed to avoid arrest and prosecution for his HIV-related crimes. This verdict made Richard eligible for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During the penalty phase, the defense presented mitigating factors about Richard's previously clean criminal record and his role as a father. However, the prosecution's case about premeditation and the calculated nature of the crime proved overwhelming. The jury recommended life without parole, and Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Richard accordingly in January 2004. Jennifer Caldwell divorced Richard immediately after the trial concluded and moved with her children to Oregon to escape the media attention and start fresh. She later became an advocate for HIV testing and awareness, working with organizations to educate people about the importance of honest communication in relationships and the legal consequences of knowingly transmitting infectious diseases. Amanda's family established the Amanda Torres Memorial. The scholarship ensured that Amanda's memory would be associated with opportunity and aspiration rather than the tragedy that ended her life. The case served as a stark reminder that the choice to protect oneself through deception and violence can lead to consequences far more devastating than any truth could ever be. The tragic case of Richard Caldwell and Amanda Torres exposes the dangerous progression from deception to deadly violence. What began as workplace attraction escalated through lies, betrayal, disease transmission, and ultimately murder. This case demonstrates how secrets compound exponentially, creating pressure that can drive someone to unthinkable acts. Richard's 3-year concealment of his HIV status wasn't just medical negligence. It was criminal endangerment that put multiple lives at risk. His decision to pursue an affair while knowingly infected shows a complete disregard for human life that predated the murder itself. When Amanda's letter threatened to expose his deception, Richard chose violence over accountability. The power dynamic between Richard and Amanda highlights workplace vulnerability. Young employees seeking advancement can become targets for exploitation by those in authority positions. Amanda's trust in someone she viewed as a mentor ultimately cost her everything. This case also emphasizes the importance of HIV disclosure and testing. Jennifer Caldwell's narrow escape from infection was pure chance, not protection. Richard's willingness to endanger both his wife and his lover reveals the depth of his selfishness. If you found this case analysis valuable, please subscribe to Cold Case Reveals and hit that notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments below about how workplace relationships can become dangerous, and let me know where you're watching from. Your engagement helps us continue examining cases that reveal important truths about human nature and justice. Amanda Torres deserved a future filled with success and happiness. Instead, she became a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong person with your life. Her memory reminds us that some secrets are worth exposing, regardless of the consequences.